On today's episode, we break down the top 20 USHL prospects for the 2025 NHL Draft.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm Sebastian, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, usually joined by Hattie Kalakash, who will be rejoining for next week's shows. But nonetheless, we have an exciting show here in store for you today, as I'll be breaking down my top 20 rankings for the USHL prospects for our second Elite Prospects ranking meeting of the season. In the first segment, we'll be breaking down the top 6 prospects, in my opinion, from the USHL this season. I'll also talk a little bit about why this might be a bit of a weaker class for the USHL relative to typical years, where we've just been seeing so much talent pouring out of the NTDP and other USHL teams. And then in the second segment, I'll be breaking down the 7th to 12th best prospects in the USHL, and then we'll be wrapping up in the third with the last 8 names on the list to wrap up the top 20 of players that I think are certainly deserving of being drafted on draft day. But before we jump into the show, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, without further ado, let's dive straight into the rankings here. And let's just talk about a couple categories first. I'll be mentioning the ranges I have these players ranked. I'll be talking about how these players play, what team they play for, all the typical information. And I'll also be saying whether they are an A, B, or C grade prospect in my book. A grade being just a standard first round talent. We kind of think that there are only 20 to 23 A-level prospects in this 2025 draft class from what we've seen so far this season, so not the strongest depth for the A-grade range. Then we have a big glut of B prospects here in the USHL, and then followed by the C-level ones that are going to wrap up the episode. So let's start off with the only A-grade name in my book from the USHL, who is a really clear first round talent at this point, and that is Jack Murtagh. He's a power forward winger, 6 feet, 185 pounds, not the biggest guy in the world, but he plays with violence, has a ridiculous shot. We've been talking about him so much on this podcast, and we will continue to do so going through this draft cycle. He plays with violence. He's still very raw in his habits. He can still be a bit linear, but there are flashes of playmaking skill on top of the goal scoring. And I think that this is a player that could certainly become a solid piece on a second line as a complementary goal scorer, but who also really helps in terms of just tilting the ice in his team's favor, and a player that I would personally be very comfortable drafting in that 18 to 25 range come draft day. He is also, in my opinion, quite clearly the best player from this season's NTDP class. And considering that there isn't a single top 15 caliber player from the NTDP, this is certainly a bit of a weaker year for the program. Next, at number 2, we have Carter Amico, a player who is unfortunately out for the season. And there's a glut of players here between 2 and 5 that I think are quite tight, and there are definitely arguments to be made in any which direction here. I still have Amico as my favorite from this group. The flashes of upside are the best of this selection, I think. And he's a fantastic rush defender, not the prettiest skater in the world, but good edge work. He commits himself when he takes very calculated risks when it comes to committing his weight in any direction. And I also think that he's able to recover from those plays a bit better than other defensemen that we'll be talking about here today. So a player that I definitely think has some second pairing upside, especially in terms of the shutdown defensive ability, but the handling skill is something to really work with. There's a lot there as a foundation. It's still really raw. He's very much a projection at this point, but I think that the upside is there. But he may be falling down my board as the season progresses because, again, he's out for this season with injury, and missing 2/3 of a draft year to injury is not ideal in terms of development. At number 3, we have the most dynamic player from this group of USHLers, and that is Benjamin Kevan. Kevan is a 6 foot, 172-pound center/winger. He's been mainly playing at right wing this season in the viewings I've caught, whether that be with Des Moines in the USHL or even with the NTDP. He's gotten a couple call-ups to play with the program. Mainly been playing a depth role, like a bottom 6 checking role, which is not his main strength, though he didn't do that poorly, as well as a little stint in the top 6 of the NTDP in their showcase against the CHL draft eligible all-star team. And Kevan did his best, but that was always going to be a mismatch. But he is a really dynamic puck handler. He loves to have the puck on his stick. He's the most creative player from this bunch in terms of inventiveness, creativity in tight, finding complex solutions to the problems he encounters. Really interesting player. Also had a lot of success already last season as a D-1 in the USHL, where he was the highest scoring USHLer from the 2023-24 campaign to return to the league for this season as everyone else graduated to college. And he's been, as advertised, he's been really, really good this season, and there's definitely arguments for him to be higher than Amico and maybe even in that Jack Murtagh range. A lot of the other scouts at Elite Prospects have those in the same range and even like Kevan over Murtagh, but I still have a bit of a clear distinction between those two players at this stage, but Kevan's definitely a potential riser on this board. At number 4, we have William Moore. This is a compromise in every which way. William Moore, in terms of pure talent and pure upside flashes, one of the best of the USHL this season for sure. The inconsistency is a really big hurdle, and I know a lot of scouts have been really frustrated in their viewings of William Moore. In terms of gliding habits, lack of engagement, lack of any ability to get involved physically at this point. He's still very, very small. He's 6'2", but 161 pounds, and that might be soaking wet. He is still a really lanky little player and struggles to hold his own in physical battles, even against junior competition, even against U18 competition. So a lot of question marks with William Moore, but he's really intelligent, and that combination of skill and intelligence at times flashes really brightly. The raw tools are also very good. Has a plus level shot, plus level creative vision down low in the offensive zone, plus level handling ability. The skating is a bit wonky still mechanically. He's very hunched, not by far from the prettiest skater of this draft class, but not overly inefficient either. He gets around the ice decently well, but there's definitely still some key mechanical tweaks that can be made to really, really improve the output of his skating. So a lot of runway with this prospect, but in terms of projecting him to the NHL, it is entirely theoretical at this point. You have to use your imagination to see what this player could end up as in a valuable role in the NHL. So I can understand why some scouts have him in their mid-second round, and I can understand why others have him in their mid-first round. There's a wide range of possible outcomes with this player. So really interesting one. I'd be curious about your thoughts in the comments to those of you who have watched him, because I still have more questions than answers with William Moore. At number 5, going back to the ranges, Carter Amico is a 22 to 30 range player on my board. Benjamin Kevan, 23 to 32 range, so late first round, and William Moore, kind of the same thing, 25 to 32. Now we move into more the second round range, and starting off here with Cole McKinney, a bit of a divisive center prospect, but really good motor, really good physicality, good shot, good two-way habits. He's very meat and potatoes. Very much a north-south kind of skater, but he supports Jack Murtagh, his line mate, extremely well. They have the best chemistry of any two players on the NTDP so far this season. And he's really grown on me. I know a lot of other scouts, including at Elite Prospects, have him really low. It's why he didn't really end up in consideration high on the Elite Prospects top 50 ranking, which should be out very soon. But he's a player that I really appreciate. I think he will be a solid bottom six center in the NHL someday. Not the flashiest, not overly skilled, pretty basic of a player, but one that I really think is valuable and will play for a decently long time at the National Hockey League level. Then to wrap up this first segment, we have one of my favorite players to watch of this bunch, and that is William Belle, who falls in the 35 to 50 range. Jack Murtagh was a 30 to 40 range player on my board. We're still well within the B grade prospect, so second round caliber. There's a lot of them for the USHL this year. Very few A levels, but a lot of that big glut in the B level category. William Belle is the next one I wanted to talk about. He is a tank of a player, 6'4" right shot winger, can play on the penalty kill, really solid two-way habits, and offensively can protect the puck really nicely. There are flashes of playmaking down low. Really, really solid possession player. He retains possession, he wins possession, he keeps possession. He does a lot of really nice things on the ice, and also flashes a real power game in terms of lowering the shoulder, driving with the knee to the net, really cutting out into the middle of the ice, bypassing defenders. There's a lot to like there. The skating, I think, it does not hold him back, and he's like 220 pounds. This is a really big player, but who knows how to make the most out of his frame on both sides of the puck, and a player I really appreciate in terms of what he brings. Another NTDPer, the only non-NTDPer that we've talked about so far, has been Benjamin Kevan, and he has also played with the NTDP at times this season. So very much NTDP heavy at this point in the USHL, which will probably only be more accentuated in years to come with the new NCAA ruling in terms of allowing CHL players in. You're going to see a lot of these high-end players that may have taken the USHL route go with the CHL route instead. But yeah, it's an interesting draft class for the USHL. We'll keep digging into that 7 to 12 range in the next segment. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need so you can place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your swings on American football with the NFL or European football with the Champions League, the choice really is yours. Or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, just maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer you. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Alrighty, let's keep this episode rolling. At number 7, another NTDPer and another solid two-way player, Andrew O'Neill, a player that I have in the 40 to 50 range on draft day. Definitely a second-round caliber player in my eyes. He plays with pace. He plays with intensity. Does not have a top 6 projection in terms of upside, but a decent basis of skill in terms of projecting to a bottom 6 NHL capacity. Really good motor. Very efficient as well with his roots. He's always in the right place at the right time, and a very good support piece. He's a line elevator. He makes the lives of his wingers easier, and he's able to also create space and time for them to create offense. So certainly a player I value, and I think in the mid-second round, if you get a guy that could maybe top out as a third-line centerman and otherwise be a really, really capable number 4 guy down the middle, I think that is pretty solid value. Next, we have Mason Moe, who again, has played games with the NTDP, but it's not his primary team. He actually plays with the Madison Capitals alongside another player that we'll talk about later on in this segment. And he's a really speedy, like a fantastic skater, really speedy forward. He can play on the wing or down the middle. I've seen him excel in both. Center, obviously, there have been a couple more hurdles there, but the best viewing I have logged has been down the middle for Mace'o. He's able to drop really low defensively, like support his defensemen without being overly competent in his own zone as of yet. He's certainly a bit raw still in that facet, but the raw tools are good. The effort level is really solid. He's played a checking role in his call-ups with the NTDP and done very, very well in that smaller, more limited capacity. But when he has the puck on his stick in the USHL, he's really, really creative, especially on the power play. Really good playmaker, really good puck mover. He's excellent in transition and being the primary puck carrier. A real like line driver potentially in the NHL. Not in terms of like a pure top six capacity, but perhaps a third line driver from the wing or down the middle if he really pans out. But certainly some strong raw tools, and a player I think is quite valuable and thus have ranked in the 40 to 48 range for the draft. There's a lot of players in this glut here. Next, we have Jacob Rombach, 6'6", 220-pound right shot defenseman who plays with the Lincoln Stars in the USHL. A 40 to 55 range guy for me at this point, but he could certainly rise up even as high as into my first round come June, because the raw tools are excellent. He moves well. He's good on retrievals. He's good in the breakout. He's not dynamic offensively. He's not going to really do all that much in the offensive zone, but he's a really, really good play killer, possession winner, and rush starter. So a player that can do a lot of different things that modern defensemen need to do, and all of that in a mobile 6'6" frame. He's going to be a player that's certainly valued by some NHL teams, and he reminds me a lot of a player that Lincoln developed last season, Adam Kleber, who ended up being a second-round selection for the Buffalo Sabres, and I thought that was a great get for the Sabres and a really good value in that second-round range, and I think I'll feel quite similarly about Jacob Rombach come draft day. At number 10, we have William Horcoff of the US NTDP, a 6'4", even 6'5", perhaps, centerman, who is a really, really intelligent player. He still has a lot of growing into his frame to do. He's only 180 something pounds at this point, and he's the second to last player in my B grade range for the USHL, and I have him also in that 40 to 55 range, just like Jacob Rombach. And a player that has flashed some real elements of creativity and puck handling skill, especially at his frame. But more than anything, he's a smart player who knows what he does well. He knows what tools he has. He knows how to use his frame, and a player that I think has value on both sides of the puck, offensively and defensively, and also has some middle six upside. I think there's an off chance that he could hit a second line type of upside. Certainly has a bit more upside than other players, a bit higher than him on this board, but he's also a bit more raw at this point than they are. But he's just coming off an injury at the moment. But looking forward to watching him more this season, and he's also a climbing candidate to make his way up into my top 6 for the USHL this year. Then we have the last B grade prospect here in the 40 to 60 range, Ryker Lee, the line mate of Mace'o in with the Madison Capitals. And this is a player I really appreciate. I don't know if it's going to work for him at the NHL, but I really, really want it to, for a couple very clear reasons. Firstly, the weakness is blatantly obvious. It is the skating. The skating is rough. It is one of the worst ones in this draft class. Probably the worst one in the USHL draft class, but probably one of it's not very good, all things considered. But that said, he's intelligent and he's really skilled. And when he's able to pick up steam, his hands, his brain, his passing ability, they all work at his highest gears. And when he gets rolling and he's handling the puck, entering the offensive zone, generating entries, I've seen him dangle between 3-4 defensive players and creating something at the end of it. A really quick processor of the game, very creative, excellent handler of the puck. But again, the feet are a limiting factor, both with how much he's able to leverage his dynamism, how that's going to translate to the NHL, and also the limitations in deception that his feet bring. But despite all those question marks, he's a player that I would take a swing on at the later end of the second round, and certainly a player that I think could be a really solid depth scorer, because he has a ridiculous shot. The playmaking has been growing a lot. He's, I believe, still the top scorer among all draft eligibles in the USHL this season. There's a lot to like with Ryker Lee. Also a longer runway, I think, in terms of development, because he was mainly playing high school and prep hockey. Up until this season, he was also in that same Shattuck St. Mary's team alongside Cole Eiserman and Macklin Celebrini. So he's been playing with high-level players for a long time. He knows how to complement them and how to create in his own ways as well around them. So a player I really appreciate, and one that I think deserves a call on day 2 in the second round. Finally, for this segment, we have Mace'o Phillips, the big hulking defenseman from the US NTDP, 6'5", 220 pounds, really, really big left shot defenseman who can play with real physicality. There are some games I've caught where he's been very averse to engaging physically, but when he does engage, it is very, very effective. He's a massive body, really, really long range. He uses that range and radius to shepherd play towards the boards. He's as good of like a play suffocator as he is a play killer, which I like to see from bigger defensemen as well. It's not always just be chasing the big hit to kill a play and to get left back in the dust. One issue with Phillips is that when a player gets around him, he struggles to make his way back to catch up. This explosiveness through pivots is certainly still an area of weakness for him, but he's really fluid as a skater at this point. It's just the explosiveness, and I mean, with that frame, that's understandable. It's going to take some time for him to gain the muscles to move with that explosiveness at his size. But that wraps up this second segment. In the final one, we're going to round out the top 20 here, starting off with another NTDP defenseman, and probably a big name that some may be surprised I haven't covered just yet. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. Alrighty, let's wrap up the show here. So at number 13, also we are now within my C range of prospects. Mace'o Phillips was a C grade as well, but all the other players that you're going to hear about in this episode are all C grades, and also all of my C grades that I've had so far in my viewings. Everyone else is D or lower grades that aren't overly on the radar in terms of draft boards at this stage of the draft cycle. So first and foremost here, we have Charlie Trethewey, a very divisive prospect that I know has a lot of teams that really, really like him. A lot of NHL scouts have this player a lot higher on their boards, up inside the first round and even like towards the upper end. But a player that has a lot of warts, in my opinion, despite having a good basis of physicality and mobility. And it's that combination with the right shot that makes him valuable in many eyes. I haven't really seen it in my viewings. The decision-making is porous. It is a real problem at this point, even against USHL competition or lower pace, like third division college teams. Trethewey really struggles to make good decisions under pressure, to stay composed when forecheckers are coming in on him. The retrieval ability, the breakout skill are certainly impacted by those weaknesses. And defensively, there's also a lot of problematic habits in terms of puck watching, missing secondary and tertiary threats, completely losing the man that he was supposed to be marking, and not even looking back to check, and before you know it, the puck's in the back of the net, and on retrievals as well. In terms of that lack of composure, it leads to a lot of turnovers, a lot of chances going the other way, a lot of defending odd man rushes that he has to do to make up for his own mistakes. And skilled, dynamic players get around him relatively easily. He bites on deceptive moves, and he's a player that I've had had issues with in terms of projecting him to the NHL. That said, the raw tools are really good, and he deserves to still be in this conversation of draft eligible prospects. It's just a very frustrating one for me, from my perspective, so far this year. But he's one of the youngest players in this draft class. He's a late August birthday, or he's an early August birthday, so still very young for the class and a really good skater. Lots to still like here with the player, but definitely more questions than answers at this point. Then we have Adam Benák, the very small, dynamic centerman who's playing with the Youngstown Phantoms in the USHL. 5'7", 157 pounds. He is certainly undersized, but he's intelligent. He's super intense. I love the way he plays the game of hockey. Like, I could watch him a lot longer than I could Charlie Trethewey. I'll tell you that much. I really enjoy watching this kid play hockey, and he's a fantastic junior hockey player. And I think he'll be a fantastic European pro hockey player. With bigger ice surface, more time and space, I think he's going to really reap a lot of rewards. Getting inside, getting to the middle lane, getting to the dangerous areas has been a real problem this season for him, even against the USHL competition on smaller ice. He's very much pushed to the periphery, and he's been quite effective from those areas. He's almost a point a game so far this year. He's one of the better performing scorers in the USHL among draft eligible talents, but there's still a lot of questions here, and that inability to access dangerous areas is something that I can't quite get beyond in terms of projection, because undersized players that can't access the middle don't crack it in impactful roles in the NHL. It just doesn't happen, and I think that there's a long road for Benák to compensate for that. But the high-end motor, the defensive habits, the off-puck movement, the intelligence is off the charts. Playmaking ability is really good. He's been working on his shot this season as well. A lot to like, but a player that I can't really rank higher than a C grade and a 50 to 70 range. Like, I think if you can get a player like Benák in the third round, sure, take that swing. I think that's more than worth the bet. But in terms of first round risk, I have yet to see it as much as I've loved watching this player. Kind of similar for the next one, Luka Radivojevic, who transferred over at the beginning of this season and who's playing with the Muskegon Lumberjacks. Undersized right shot defenseman who is developing in Sweden. He's a Slovak player, and he's 5'10" and 165 pounds. He's a really solid skater, really good puck mover, solid passer. Some real limitations in his offensive dare, his desire to try things. He's quite conservative positionally in the offensive zone and is much more of a facilitator than he is a creator offensively. And in transition, solid breakout passer, decent enough as a breakout a carrier as well. But I think that for an undersized defenseman, there's a lack of just offensive dynamism that you need to crack it in the NHL at this frame. And he's not like a shutdown, like high-end transition defender either to compensate, though he does use his skating well to defend the rush. And he's probably already the best puck-moving defenseman in the entire USHL, but that level of translating that to the NHL is a really big leap. And I have some questions. He's another player I think will do really well in Europe. Then we have LJ Mooney. Perhaps a similar story here again, 5'6", 146 pounds for the right winger. Really high motor, never stops working, quite creative. He's back from injury, a really, really, really ugly knee-on-knee hit that he suffered. So very glad to see him back and playing again with the NTDP. But a player that, again, I don't think that there's quite enough dynamism to compensate for the size to make it work in the NHL. So still a lot of question marks with him. I love watching him play as well, similar to Adam Benák. They've been quite similar in many facets in my eyes so far this season. And there's a lot of skill with both these players. It's just that it has to be at a really, really high level for it to work in the NHL with this profile. And with Mooney, I'd love to see it work. I'd love to be eating my words in 3 or 4 years time. But at this point, I still have some doubts. Next at number 17 in the 60 to 70 range, we have Conrad Fondrk, another centerman from the US NTDP, 5'11", 174 pounds. Another quite agile player who can flash some skill off the rush, builds speed really nicely, decent enough puck handler at speed, but limitations in dynamism. quite a smart player. He can support well defensively. He's a very reliable player for the NTDP in my viewing so far this season, quite consistent. But in terms of NHL upside, I think that if he really pans out, you're getting a supportive third line piece that can help in terms of rushes and is positionally sound, but isn't going to wow you with offensive creation, even at those higher speeds. Another NTDP forward who I quite appreciate as well is Jacob Kvasnicka. He's number 18 on my board in my 60 to 75 range on the ranking. And he is a 5'11", 174-pound forward for the program. He plays with a lot of jam, high intensity, high pace, never stops working, and is able to really create some havoc down low with that effort level. The raw tools aren't fantastic, but it's the mindset, it's the energy. He's a player that I think could do quite well in a checking role in the NHL if he pans out. But in terms of upside, we're definitely getting into the range of players where it's a lot more limited in scope of bottom of the lineup kind of potentials. At 19, we have a left shot defenseman and captain of the US NTDP, Asher Barnett. He's a really solid player. He's a guy that I think could have a long career on the third pairing in the NHL. Really reliable, plays with physicality, even though he's just 6 feet, 185 pounds. He's solidly built. He's difficult to move off of where he plants himself. And he's also very strong on his stick. He's able to shepherd plays to the boards, kill them there. He's able to really get play away from the dangerous areas very effectively, and is probably the most consistent defenseman that the program has this season now that Carter Amico is out. So a player that I think is quite valuable to the NTDP, and it has some 65 to 75 range value on draft day in terms of a guy that could plug a hole down the line. Might not need the longest time to develop either because he's decently polished as well at this point, but upside's limited and it's never a guarantee. And then last but not least, at number 20 in the 70 to 80 range, in the final C grade prospect in the USHL in my eyes, we have Anthony Allain-Samaké, the Montreal native and one of the youngest players in the draft class, just 5 days off the cutoff as a September 10th, 07 birthday. He's a 6 foot, 180-pound left shot defenseman who plays with Sioux City in the USHL. He moves quite well, decent defensive habits. Offensive activation's really interesting, quite willing to do so right along the boards, and uses his reach really well to protect possession. He's very, very, very raw. Still a lot of projection here in mind in terms of what he could develop into in the NHL, but I think that there is a bottom pairing potential here in this player. There are elements that I really like. I still have to watch a little bit more to be sure, but a player I definitely think is worth a mid-round swing come draft day. He's an interesting prospect I think a team should be willing to take on. But that wraps up this episode. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave us a comment down below letting us know what you thought about the episode, what ideas you might have for future episodes, and which players would you rank higher or lower among USHL prospects this year. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always really appreciate our everydayers. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Sports Today, a 24-hour news show that brings you all the news you could possibly want to have access to that's going on in the sporting world today. But that wraps things up here for us tonight. My name is Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, usually joined by Hattie Kalikesh. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope that you tune back in very soon.